tossed out with an argument that he enjoys complete immunity from prosecution. In her order, Judge Chutkan said that she would set a new trial date for the proceeding in federal district court in Washington if and when Mr. Trump's immunity claims are resolved. The immunity claims are now in front of a 3-judge panel of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, which has been mulling the issue since oral arguments were heard on January 9. The panel, which expressed skepticism about Mr. Trump's position, has yet to return a decision after setting an extremely aggressive schedule for briefings to be filed. So friends, Donald Trump has 4 criminal prosecutions pending against him, 2 federal and 2 state. You know, in my 30 years as a prosecutor, I think I once had a defendant, happened to be a murder defendant, who committed 3 separate murders and had 3 murder cases pending against him. But I've searched my memory. I don't think I ever had a defendant in my 30 years who had 4 criminal cases pending against him. Donald Trump is something of a record-setting criminal. But let's kind of work through chronologically where Donald Trump's cases are and talk about when his first trial might actually begin. So, as we just discussed, the March 4 trial date in the D.C. election subversion case we thought might be the first to go to trial, but Donald Trump has gummed up the works by filing a largely frivolous appeal claiming he has absolute presidential immunity. You know, he could kill his opponents, his political opponents, while in office, and nobody could touch him, nobody could hold him accountable, nobody could prosecute him. That's laughable. It's contrary to everything that our democracy stands for, and it ultimately will be rejected. But Donald Trump knows the value of delay, and that's precisely why he filed this motion and why he is now appealing his loss of the motion in the trial court. So we just have to wait this one out. So the March 4 trial date has been vacated. It's been postponed. Okay, what happens next? Well, chronologically, I think the next important date is March 1st. It's not a trial date. It's what we call a status hearing or a scheduling conference date. And it's in that case down in Florida. That would be his unlawful retention of classified documents, his obstruction of justice, and his violation of our nation's espionage laws. The real problem with that case is not the strength, the quality, the quantity of the evidence against him. It's overwhelming. It's the judge, Judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, who has been doing favor after favor, though, for Donald Trump. There's a status hearing, a scheduling conference in that case that is currently on the calendar for March 1st. I think the reason that was set, and it was set months ago, was because by March 1st, Judge Cannon and the parties, the prosecution, and Donald Trump and his defense lawyers and his co-defendants would know if the March 4 trial date was going to go or was going to be continued. We now know it's being continued. What does that mean? It means when they go into court in Florida on March 1st, they will talk about whether the trial date in the Florida case, which is set for May 20th, is still a viable date. And it looks like it may be. Why? Because Donald Trump won't be in trial in D.C. beginning in early March for, 4, 6, 8 weeks. So he will now be able to prepare, his attorneys will be able to prepare for a May 20th trial date in Florida. I don't pretend Judge Cannon is going to stick with that May 20th date, but that's something that will probably be decided on March 1st in that status hearing or that scheduling conference down in Florida. When is the next important date on the calendar? March 25th. And I really like this one. That's Donald Trump's criminal prosecution in New York by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg for election interference in 2016. Now remember, that case involves 36 felony crimes of falsifying business records, not falsifying business records to gain some, unlawful tax advantage. No, falsifying business records to hide the fact that he was in a relationship with a porn star, to bury that deeply damaging information from we the people, the American voters in 2016. So that is, in a very real sense, an election interference case. That's scheduled to go to trial in New York on March 25th, virtually just around the corner. And given that he's not now going to trial on March 4, guess what? He's freed up to go to trial on March 25th in New York. There would be a certain symmetry about it if that was the first trial to commence against Donald Trump, because that was the first criminal indictment of Donald Trump. So we will know in the coming weeks whether that March 25th trial date in New York ends up being the first criminal prosecution that actually kicks off against Donald Trump. When is the next important date? Well, now we have to hop back down to Florida, because after that March 25th trial date in New York sorts itself out, the next trial date on the books is, as we just mentioned, May 20th down in Florida. And again, if Donald Trump goes to trial in New York beginning on March 25th, well, then that May 20th date may not be realistic. He may still be in trial or maybe finishing up his trial in New York, so the May 20th date may have to get pushed. So what's the next important date on the calendar after May 20th? It's the Georgia RICO case. And, there has been some developments down there with Fani Willis talking about having a personal relationship with one of the prosecutors on the team that's prosecuting Trump and the 18 other RICO co-defendants in Georgia, Trump's criminal associates, his co-conspirators. And it's a bad look in the court of public opinion, perhaps, but it looks like it will be much ado about nothing in the court of law. Based on what I've reviewed and what I've read, what I've seen, I don't think it will have any impact on the RICO prosecution of Donald Trump and his criminal associates down in Georgia. So, but the next date we need to think about is, I believe, August 5th. It's not a hard date. It is a date that Fani Willis requested for the first RICO trial to begin down in Georgia. But that date hasn't been set. It does look like there is, an August trial in the mix, at least as far as DA Willis is concerned. That's when she would like the RICO trials to commence. But it's an open question as to when the first RICO trials will actually kick off down in Georgia. But keep an eye on August. But of course, there is this domino effect, because depending on which earlier trial goes first, that could end up pushing the later trials down the road. But here is the one thing that may actually end up being the most important thing to keep in mind. The March 4 trial date that was just vacated, canceled, postponed. That trial will be put back on the calendar as soon as Donald Trump's ridiculous immunity claim is definitively rejected. First by the appellate court, which has it now. And if they definitively reject it next week, and the Supreme Court says, we're not even taking it up for review, which is the right call, because there is no issue of constitutional importance or significance to be reviewed on the absolute immunity front. Why do I say that, friends? Because there's no federal law on the books. There's no appellate court opinion, no case law, no precedent, and there's no constitutional principle that says a president is absolutely immune against prosecution. So once the appellate court rejects it, that should be the end of it. Now, there is still some time that will be involved in Trump filing more appeals, but I'm hopeful that the Supreme Court says we're not going to review an issue that has no support in the law or the Constitution. That would be frivolous. That would simply be delaying Trump's trial for the sake of delay. Let's hope the Supreme Court doesn't do that. So here is I'm going to call it good news. The March 4 trial date that was just vacated, that was just canceled, that trial will have to go back on Trump's trial calendar. And as these other trials sort their way out, they either start or they don't start, they get pushed down the road a bit, there will be some prosecution daylight in Donald Trump's schedule. And Judge Chutkan, who's presiding over Donald Trump's D.C. election subversion trial, will be able to drop that trial and a trial date in that case right into that prosecution daylight once it opens up. So it may be that Donald Trump's D.C. federal prosecution for trying to overturn the election gets dropped onto the calendar in May, in June, in July, depending on when Donald Trump's criminal dance card opens up. And that means that case will be resolved by a jury of Donald Trump's peers before the November 2024 election. And that is enormously consequential to everyone because, as I've said all along, in the horrific event that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee for president, I think even his supporters, his base, his potential voters have a right to know if they're casting their ballot for a convicted felon or for a completely innocent man who's been found not guilty on all counts, fully exonerated by a jury of his peers. Yeah, the voters need to know that before they go to the polls in November 2024. So friends, we remain on this justice roller coaster, and it doesn't look like we're getting off anytime soon. And it's a real e-ticket ride. Those of you of a certain age will know what an e-ticket ride is. But we're on this justice roller coaster, and we're going to remain buckled in through all the ups and downs, through all the hairpin turns, through all the loop-de-loops, until it pulls into the station and the first jury is in the box and they're prepared to judge Donald Trump. And that's when Donald Trump will be convicted. So friends, why do I say Donald Trump will be convicted so definitively, so confidently? Well, for 30 years as a prosecutor, it was really one of my primary responsibilities, one of my most frequent duties, to assess the evidence and try to decide whether we should indict and prosecute someone. You know, determine whether the strength and the quality and the quantity of the evidence was such that we had a reasonable likelihood of conviction. And I say Donald Trump will be convicted because the evidence of his guilt is not just strong, it's overwhelming, it's irrefutable. And I say Donald Trump will be convicted because his incessant lies in the court of public opinion will not see the light of day in a court of law. And I say Donald Trump will be convicted because I still believe that justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.